Imagine an aircraft crash so baffling that, nearly a year later, investigators are still locked in a stalemate, debating two completely opposing theories about why 260 lives were lost. One of these theories points to a shocking human act, the other to a catastrophic system failure, and a new report is about to challenge everything we thought we knew. On June 12, 2025, Air India Flight 171, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, crashed shortly after takeoff, killing 241 of the 242 people on board and 19 on the ground. The captain and first officer also perished in the accident. My thoughts go out to every one of those families. As we delve into the two primary theories surrounding this tragedy, it is crucial to approach the discussion with immense care, especially given that one theory implicates the flight crew. Any such finding, if it ever becomes official, must be stated with rigorous evidence, not assumption or implication. The primary official source of information is the preliminary report from India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, the AAIB, which has faced its own share of controversy, leading many to question the objectivity of the investigating organization. However, to present these two competing theories, we will proceed with the assumption that the AAIB reports are accurate. Additionally, a new analysis has recently been published by the Safety Matters Foundation of India, or SMF, an organization founded by an Indian pilot. On April 12, 2026, the SMF released a frame-by-frame analysis of CCTV footage, providing an intriguing timeline that plays a significant role in the second theory, which we will discuss shortly. Air India Flight 171 departed Ahmedabad, India, on the afternoon of June 12, 2025. The aircraft, a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner with registration Victor Tango Alpha November Bravo, carried 230 passengers and 12 crew members. The weather was clear, with daytime visibility of 6,000 meters and calm winds, indicating no environmental factors contributed to the accident. At 1:38:39 local time, the aircraft took off, reaching a maximum airspeed of 180 knots, which is normal for a 787 departure. Approximately 3 seconds after takeoff, both fuel control switches moved from the run to the cutoff position, 1 second apart. Both engines immediately ceased producing thrust, leaving the aircraft without power. It was neither high enough nor fast enough to recover. The 787's ram air turbine, or RAT, automatically deployed as an emergency system, a small propeller that extends from the aircraft's belly, using airflow to generate hydraulic and electrical power when engines fail. The Auxiliary Power Unit, APU, attempted to auto-start, and the Electronic Engine Control, EC, similar to a FADEC on the 787, began managing a relight sequence, sending fuel back to the engines once the switches were moved to run again. However, none of these actions mattered, the aircraft was simply too low. At 1:39:11, a mere 32 seconds after takeoff, Air India Flight 171 struck the hostile block of BJ Medical College, approximately 1.6 kilometers from the runway threshold. The forward fuselage was destroyed on impact. Tragically, 241 of the 242 people on board were killed. One passenger, a 40-year-old seated in row 11, survived. On the ground, 19 people were killed, and 67 were seriously injured. This marks the first fatal accident involving a Boeing 787 since the type entered service in 2011 and stands as the deadliest aviation accident of the 2020s. To understand the theories that follow, it is essential to grasp how the 787's fuel control switches operate. These two switches are located on the throttle control module, positioned centrally just below the thrust levers. Moving either switch to cutoff immediately halts fuel flow to that engine, leading to no combustion and no thrust. It also cuts the electrical and hydraulic power supplied by the engine. In normal operations, these switches are used on the ground for engine startup and shutdown. In flight, they are almost never touched. They are not easily moved by accident. Each switch features a metal stop-lock mechanism, a guard, that requires the pilot to pull the switch upwards before it can be moved. This design is intended to prevent accidental activation. The AAIB confirmed, via flight data recorder, FDR, information, that both switches moved from run to cutoff 1 second apart. A key point of contention is whether the FDR data reflects a physical movement of the switches or merely an electrical signal indicating they were shut off. We will explore this further in a moment. The cockpit voice recorder, CVR, captured a crucial exchange that has profoundly influenced the investigation. One pilot asked the other why he had cut off the engines, to which the other pilot replied that he had not. This exchange is noted in the AAIB preliminary report, though it does not identify who said what. The full CVR transcript has not been publicly released, leaving us with only the paraphrased, "You cut off," and "I did not." Many have speculated that the first officer posed the question and the captain responded, but without the full CVR transcript, these remain unanswered questions. The 787 carries 2 flight recorders. On this aircraft, the rear recorder was severely damaged and unreadable, but the forward recorder survived, providing key data. Nearly a year later, the investigation presents 2 competing theories: either someone on the flight deck deliberately shut off the fuel to both engines, or an electronic failure of some kind caused the fuel flow to cease. Neither theory has been officially confirmed nor officially ruled out. We will now examine both theories, their supporting evidence, their origins, and their implications, without endorsing either one. The first theory posits that someone on the flight deck intentionally moved both fuel switches. This theory gained prominence through unnamed U.S. officials who spoke to the Wall Street Journal in November 2025, and later to Bloomberg in January 2026. These reports suggested that investigators had ruled out mechanical failure, found no evidence of sabotage, and were focusing on deliberate action by one of the pilots as the probable cause. It is critical to be direct about the sourcing here. These are unnamed sources, not official AAIB findings. The AAIB itself has not confirmed this, nor has any official investigative authority stated deliberate action as a confirmed probable cause. These are accounts from anonymous individuals familiar with the investigation, which differs significantly from an official finding. What evidence supports this theory? According to the FDR data shared by the AAIB in their preliminary report, the switches moved 1 second apart. Given that each switch has a stop-lock mechanism requiring a deliberate upward pull to move it, the argument is that an accidental, simultaneous, or sequential activation of both switches strains credibility. The investigative consensus reported by Bloomberg was that mechanical failure had been ruled out. If it was not mechanical, and not sabotage, then human action remains as the primary explanation. This is the core of the first theory. However, this theory faces several questions and potential problems. The first is its sourcing. All information pointing towards deliberate action originates from unnamed officials, not from official findings, reports, or statements. In other contexts, such sourcing would be met with significant skepticism. The second problem relates to the timing of the ram air turbine, or RAT. If the analysis by the Safety Matters Foundation, SMF, is even directionally correct, and the RAT deployed before the switches moved, then the sequence upon which the deliberate action theory depends falls apart. The RAT deploys because the engines lost power, not because someone moved a switch. If the RAT deployed first, something else must have caused that power loss, making the subsequent switch movement a response, not the cause. While the SMF analysis, based on CCTV frame-by-frame examination, may have a margin of error compared to flight recorder data, the AAIB has not refuted it. The third problem concerns the stop-lock mechanism itself. In 2018, the FAA issued a bulletin warning that this mechanism had been installed disengaged on certain Boeing aircraft, and the flagged part number was fitted to the accident aircraft. Air India never performed these recommended inspections. Therefore, arguments that the switches could not have moved without deliberate intent assume the stop lock was functioning as designed, which we do not know for certain. Finally, there is the CVR exchange: "You cut off, I did not." While this has been interpreted as one pilot accusing the other, a pilot genuinely unaware of why his engines just quit would likely say the exact same thing. The exchange is consistent with deliberate action, but it is equally consistent with two pilots attempting to diagnose a system failure that neither of them caused. The CVR exchange, therefore, does not resolve the question, it merely indicates both pilots were confused. The second theory suggests a system failure moved the switches, either electronically rather than mechanically, or at minimum, something electrical caused the engines to stop before any human intervention. This theory has gained significant momentum in recent months. The SMF's frame-by-frame examination of airport CCTV footage found that the ram air turbine deployed 2.5 seconds before the fuel switches moved to cutoff, directly conflicting with the timeline provided by the AAIB. Consider the implications. The TheRAT is an emergency system that deploys automatically when the aircraft detects a loss of engine power. If the TheRAT deployed before the switches moved, the engines were already losing power before the switches changed position. This would imply that a human moved the switches after the engines were already failing, or that the switch data timing is incorrect, or that the CCTV analysis has a margin of error. It is important to remember that the SMF is not an official investigating authority. Their analysis has not been confirmed by the AAIB, they do not have access to all the evidence the AAIB possesses, and their potential agenda in this accident is unknown. Nevertheless, their finding has been widely covered and represents the most substantive public challenge to the deliberate action theory to date. 1 month after the SMF released its analysis, on May 6, 2026, the Federation of Indian Pilots formally requested the AAIB to expand its investigation. They urged an examination into whether an electrical anomaly before takeoff could have caused an unintended dual-engine shutdown, pointing to the 787's lithium-ion battery systems and abnormal voltage behavior as a possible mechanism. There is a precedent worth noting. In 2019, an All Nippon Airways 787 experienced an engine shutdown during final approach, not because a pilot touched anything, but because the aircraft's software mistakenly interpreted the plane as being on the ground. This triggered an automatic system, the Thrust Control Malfunction Accommodation System, which moved the fuel switch from run to cutoff without any pilot input. An attorney and aviation safety expert who covered that incident stated that a simple malfunction could not yet be ruled out in the Air India case. However, the system failure theory also has its problems. The biggest is the stop-lock mechanism. The physical design of the switches requires a deliberate upward pull to move them. They are not designed to be moved by an electrical signal, a software command, or a voltage spike. They are mechanically guarded. If a system failure caused both engines to shut down, what mechanism physically moved the switches through their guards 1 second apart? If there was some kind of short, why was there a 1 second delay between the cutoff of the two switches? While the Federation of Indian Pilots points to electrical anomalies, no one has identified a confirmed pathway by which an electrical fault physically moves two mechanically guarded switches in sequence. This remains a significant gap in the theory. A second problem for this theory comes from Air India's own simulator testing. 1 week after the crash, Air India conducted simulator experiments. Pilots attempted to replicate electronic failures that could cause a dual-engine flameout, but they were unsuccessful. It is important to note that these were internal simulations, not official NTSB or AAIB findings, and Air India certainly has an interest in the outcome of the investigation. The third problem is the Bloomberg reporting. Multiple unnamed sources told Bloomberg in January 2026 that investigators had ruled out mechanical failure. If this is accurate, even as an unofficial signal from within the investigation, then the system failure theory faces significant opposition from those who have actually seen all the data. While unnamed sources are not official findings, these are not random observers either. Finally, the SMF analysis itself, as compelling as the TheRAT timing finding is, comes with real limitations. Photogrammetric analysis of CCTV footage is not equivalent to flight recorder data. Frame rates and timestamp alignment are crucial, and the margin of error on a 2.5 second differential measured from airport security cameras has not been independently verified. The finding is only as strong as its methodology, and that methodology has not been officially validated. There is one more crucial detail to consider. As mentioned earlier, The FAA issued a special airworthiness information bulletin in 2018, warning that fuel control switches had been installed on certain Boeing aircraft with their stop-lock mechanisms disengaged. Disengaged means the guard preventing accidental movement was not functioning as designed. The part number flagged in that bulletin was fitted to the accident aircraft. Air India stated it had not performed the recommended inspections from the 2018 bulletin because they were not mandatory. Then, on February 2, 2026, 8 months after the crash, a separate Air India 787, registration Victor Tango Alpha November X-ray, was preparing to depart London Heathrow. During engine startup, the left engine fuel control switch twice failed to stay in the run position, moving towards cutoff during ground operations. Despite this, the pilots continued the flight. Boeing assessed the aircraft and found no problem with the locking mechanism itself. However, they determined that applying force in an incorrect direction caused the switch to move easily from run to cutoff due to the geometry of the angular base plate. While these are two separate aircraft and the incidents have not been officially linked by any investigating authority, they involve the same switch type and the same fleet, raising similar questions that underpin the system failure theory. What I find most significant about the current state of this investigation is that the two theories are not just different conclusions, they have vastly different implications for everything that follows. If it was a deliberate crew action, the investigation will focus on what systems exist, or should exist, to prevent a pilot from disabling both engines in flight, and whether pre-screening processes are effective. However, if the system failure theory is correct, if the TheRAT timing holds up under official scrutiny, and if an electrical anomaly actually caused the shutdown, then the two pilots on this flight were fighting to save an aircraft that was already falling before they could effectively act. These are two profoundly different narratives. The captain, the pilot in command, was 56 years old with approximately 15,600 flight hours, nearly 8,600 of them on the 787. Colleagues described him as soft-spoken, meticulous, and a mentor to younger pilots. The first officer was 32 years old, his childhood dream was flying, inspired by his mother's 30 years as an Air India flight attendant. He had approximately 3,400 total hours, with 1,128 on the 787. Both died doing a job they had trained for, loved, and performed countless times before. If the deliberate action theory is correct, one of these men did something that resulted in the deaths of all those people. That would be an extraordinary finding, one that demands extraordinary evidence to support it. The investigation absolutely must get this right. There is one more reported layer to this investigation that deserves consideration. Reports emerged in December 2025 that AAIB and NTSB officials clashed during the inquiry, with US and Indian investigators holding differing views on the probable cause. The results of their joint data analysis at NTSB facilities have not been officially reported. The nature of the conflict, or even if it truly happened, remains unknown, as does its resolution. However, it is worth noting that the investigators themselves might not be in full agreement, which is not normal and underscores why the final report is so critically important. So, here is what we know: both fuel switches moved to cutoff 1 second apart, 3 seconds after takeoff. Both engines lost thrust, and the aircraft did not have sufficient altitude to recover, leading to the deaths of 260 people. Here is what we do not know: what caused the switches to move, whether the TheRAT timing analysis holds up under official scrutiny, what the full CVR transcript reveals beyond the single paraphrased exchange, whether the 2018 FAA advisory is relevant to this specific aircraft, and whether the February 2026 fuel switch incident on a separate Air India 787 points to a fleet-wide issue. The AAIB investigation is in its final phase. India's Civil Aviation Minister stated on May 9 that the final report is expected in approximately 1 month, aligning with the ICAO deadline of June 12, 2026, 12 months from the accident. My key takeaway from this crash is the imperative need for objectivity in investigation. If one approaches this thinking, it was surely the pilot, evidence will be found to support that position. Similarly, if one seeks to blame the manufacturer, there are signs that can be latched onto. The airline would certainly prefer it to be the pilot rather than an issue with their maintenance. But in aviation, more than almost anywhere else, the difference between "we think" and "we know" matters enormously. These two pilots are dead. They both left behind people living with an enormous burden, regardless of which theory proves true. I will cover the final report when it is released. If it confirms deliberate action, I will report it. If it confirms a system failure, I will report that. Either way, it deserves to be reported carefully, based on the evidence, with both men treated as the professionals they were until the facts state otherwise. Remember, superior judgment triumphs superior skill.